Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May is facing a mutiny inside her own Conservative Party, which threatens to scupper her Brexit deal, quite possibly her premiership too. If she loses the key parliamentary vote on her deal in just a few days' time, the UK will plunge headlong into political chaos. The stakes could hardly be higher for my guest today, Owen Paterson, a Conservative MP and former minister, intent on rejecting Mrs May's Brexit. Is it too late to avert a damaging national crisis? Owen Paterson, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
These are the most extraordinary, febrile days in British politics, and every day there is a new effort by Theresa May and her key cabinet colleagues to persuade people like you to rally behind her and support her deal with the EU 27. Are you seeing or hearing anything that is persuading you?
To vote for this deal?
There's changing your mind, because we've known for a long time you're against the deal.
Absolutely not. I've read every page of it. It is completely appalling. It completely and totally fails to deliver the promise made to the British people in the referendum that we would leave, and the promise made to the British people in the general election that leave meant leaving the single market, leaving the customs union, and leaving the remit of the European Court of Justice, which wasn't just the Conservative Party manifesto, it was also endorsed by the Labour Party. So 85% of the voters of the last election endorsed that, and this doesn't begin to go near it. Well, in fact, it goes backwards.
Well, you use that tone and these sort of grand phrases about doesn't come close, clear as day that it can't be acceptable. And how is it then that colleagues of yours in the Brexit movement, if I can put it that way, who have remained in the cabinet, see this deal in such very different terms?
Totally incomprehensible to me. I mean, I really generally don't understand it. When I was a minister, I was in charge of the CAP reforms. You know, we were
the Common Agricultural
Policy reforms. So I went along with 27 other countries, and we had allies, and we stopped some of the really stupider things happening. It wasn't a great reform in the end because we were outvoted on many things. From now on, it's hard for your viewers to imagine this. Law will be imposed on the United Kingdom where we will not have been present. And don't forget, up to now, we've been the pebble in the shoe. We've been pushing for exciting new technologies, for freer trade around the world. So we won't be holding the protectionist European back. They will make this protectionist law. It'll come to us. We will have no means of amending it, no means of repealing it. And if we don't obey it, we get clobbered by the European Court of Justice with a huge fine. It is completely unacceptable.
You see, there's something extraordinary happening in British politics. As you say that to me, I'm looking at the words of Prime Minister Theresa May. Let us not forget your Prime Minister, the leader of your political party, who wrote this letter to the nation just a few days ago saying, we will take back control of our borders, ending free movement. We will take back control of our money, putting an end to the vast annual payments to the EU. And we will take back control of our laws by ending the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. Either she's living in cloud cuckoo land or you are.
Or you wonder how she really read every page of our own agreement. I mean, I've talked to some very senior lawyers about this. I'm not a lawyer, and their interpretation is emphatically that statement is wrong. We'll be shelling out 39 billion and probably more if we get into the next financial round, if it drags on. But we'll absolutely be under the cosh of the European Court of Justice.
Her integrity, because when you're saying that is flat out wrong, you're suggesting that either she is utterly incompetent or she's a liar.
No, good question. I find it extraordinary her public statements are not in tune with my understanding and with lawyers' understanding of what is proposed. So you take this issue of trade deals. I was in the States 2 weeks ago. They were absolutely clear at USTR. There were senior members of the Democrat Party, senior members of the Republican Party, completely clear that the United States cannot do a trade deal with a country that does not decide its own tariffs and does not decide its own regulation. It is quite clear in this 585-page document we will not be deciding our tariffs and we will not be deciding our regulations.
For as long as Britain stays inside the customs union, which we know will be till December 2020 as a result of the transition, and then could be longer, because we do not know whether there will be success in reaching a long-term trade agreement with the EU by that date. And if there isn't, then of course Britain has agreed, according to the deal, to stay inside the customs union.
Well, absolutely. You've touched on one of the real horrors of this document, that there's no way out unilaterally for the UK. There's not a point in 5-10 years' time the UK says, right, that's it. You've been messing us around. We are going to leave. We cannot do that without the agreement of the European Union. It is the most extraordinary legally binding treaty to get ourselves into.
Let's take another individual, Michael Gove, who I think you would agree was very important to the Brexit campaign during the referendum, was one of the key players in getting you to the 52% vote that won you that referendum. Michael Gove, in the last 24 hours, has spoken directly to people like you, saying, look, we must not make the perfect the enemy of the good, and this deal is good. It gives Britain lots of very important things, including tariff-free access to the EU marketplace without having to pay for that access. And he says the Europeans actually don't like that. It's something we should appreciate, and that Theresa May has delivered for us.
Well, I'm afraid so. I don't agree with Michael either. We pay, what, 39 billion we're going to be putting in. We're paying about 12 billion sterling into the EU.
That's a payment for obligations and dues that are owing. Are you suggesting we just walk away without paying our bills?
If at the moment it's only 12% of our GDP, I mean, this whole thing is all about a small part of our trade, and sadly a dwindling part of our trade. We've gone down from over 60% of our trade to the EU to about 45% now, and about 35% in a few years' time. We know, according to the EU itself, that 90% of the world's growth is going to be outside the EU. We know that our trade to 100 countries on WTO terms growing 3 times faster than our trade into the EU from within it where we are now. So all this huge hoo-ha about a small and dwindling part of our trade is important. It is small.
It is small. It's more than 40% of our trade is with the European Union.
It is 12% of our GDP.
But when you're talking about trade, you have to compare what the EU offers with what other countries offer. But our trade with the EU dwarfs our trade with the United States, which you've been banging on about since the beginning of this interview.
Yeah, but we don't pay to deal with the trade with the United States or China or India or anywhere else. That is the future. That's where the growth is in the world.
Well, you don't know that, but what we do know,
I do, because I just told you.
What we do know is that if the British government cannot make a deal with the EU, and March 29th, the deadline comes along and we crash out without a deal, it is going to have an extraordinarily deleterious, damaging effect on the UK economy.
Well, I have to say why. We trade with the rest of the world on World Trade Organization terms. There's 164 countries. That's 98% of the world's trade is on World Trade Organization terms. That is a legal framework designed specifically for orderly trade. The European Union is a legal entity. It obeys laws. It's signed up to the WTO's rulings on trade facilitation, on sanitary and phytosanitary rulings. It's signed up to the Kyoto deal on the World Customs Organization. Why are they arbitrarily going to suddenly go delinquent and break the law?
Well, they wouldn't be going delinquent.
Why?
I mean, for example, tariffs would be imposed. You know that. What do you mean, why?
We would be in charge of our own tariffs.
Because the EU would treat the UK as a third party, just as it treats other countries as third-party traders, and therefore tariffs would be imposed. 10% on vehicles, up to 35% on some agri-products. You know that. It's just true.
No, there is still time, actually, to negotiate that. What we could do, which I hope...
Hang on. But let me just acknowledge that what I said is true, and that therefore all of these people, from the CBI onward to individual industrial sectors who are talking about the disaster of a no-deal Brexit, they have a fundamental point. If the tariffs come in, their business model is going to be destroyed.
No, there is time for us to take up the deal offered us by President Tusk on the 7th of March, which is a wide-ranging free trade agreement, which founded on the issue of the Northern Ireland border. And there is still time. If we get rid of this appalling draft document next Tuesday, we can move to that very rapidly. Because I
won't speak on behalf of the European Union.
No, I went to see Monsieur
Jean-Claude Juncker has said quite clearly, after this deal was done with Theresa May, quote his words, this is the best deal, this is the only deal.
Well, as President Trump said, it's the best deal for the European Union, quite right. So we'll vote, hopefully, to get rid of it next week, and we then got a chance to go back. And I went to see Monsieur Barnier to discuss the Northern Ireland border. It was very clear in that meeting that this free trade deal is still on offer. And you could go into that.
Sorry, when was this meeting?
It was probably October.
Before Theresa May signed the deal with the EU 27.
Yeah.
So the EU 27 have made a decision. Things have moved on. They've made a decision. This is the deal as far as they're concerned.
Happily, we're still a sovereign country, and if our Parliament rejects it resounding, as it looks as if it's going to, as we count today the MPs who've declared publicly they're going to vote against it, the EU is going to have to think again. And the obvious answer is to go back what they originally offered us, which is a comprehensive free trade deal with add-ons like aviation and security and other important matters as a side deal. So there is still time to do that.
The EU is thinking again.
Hang on, let me finish. And you can then move on to World Trade Organization terms, haven't triggered Article 24 of the GATT Treaty, which says that if you've started a free trade agreement, you can carry on the current basis, which is zero tariff. So we could do that with the EU if we've got their agreement to go ahead with a free trade deal. And then you've actually got 10 years to complete it.
I mean, there are so many things to unpick in your vision of how easy this would be. And I'm mindful that people have said for the last 2 years on your side of this argument, oh, doing a deal with the EU is going to be easy. Of course, that was not true. We know it's not true because here we sit today in the middle of this crisis. But the problems with your vision are manifold. One is that if, I don't believe this to be true, but if the EU were to be interested at all in renegotiating the deal, making it some sort of super Canada plus trade agreement, you wouldn't have acknowledged or addressed the problem of the Irish border, which is central to the EU's position.
Well, I have done, because I helped write the paper with the European Research Group, which we sent to the government and sent to Monsieur Barnier back in September. And that shows very clearly that with existing techniques and existing processes under existing EU law, and this is advised by people who really do understand customs. So an organisation that represents 19,000 customs organisations,
no, I do.
80%
I recollect
of
all of this.
transactions.
I also recollect the Irish Foreign Minister saying that there's absolutely no way the Irish government agrees with your position on what could be achieved by technical facilities at the border. As far as he's concerned, it is nonsense. And if you were to go down this Canada Free Trade Agreement line, then there would be a hard border.
There will never be a hard border because the UK government won't build one, the Irish government won't build one, and the EU won't buy one. So can we just forget the hard border? It's a complete paper tiger. It's not going to happen. So what we're saying is, let's be realistic. Look at what happens in the rest of the world. All borders are moving to more automation, the pre-clearance, the REC system, the traces system. It all exists now. There's nothing new. There's nothing alarming.
Why
so
do
what
you
we're facing
think
are existing techniques, existing processes within existing law. That is how you sort the Irish border. And of course the turnover, very important locally, is tiny. It's 4.9% of Northern Ireland sales go south of the border. That's 0.2% of UK GDP. Regular shipments of milk, of livestock, I think 16,000 border crossings of Guinness. These are very regular, repetitive shipments of materials,
You've
which are
no one.
Hang on.
The Ulster Farmers Union says that a no-deal outcome would be a, quote, catastrophe for Northern Ireland's farmers. You aren't persuading anybody, and I just wonder whether you will acknowledge to me that your view of what must happen next is the most enormous gamble, given everything that the Bank of England is saying about what would come with a no-deal Brexit, the Office of Budget Responsibility, the Institute for Fiscal Studies. You may laugh, but these are all
This is Project Fear. Absolutely. Mark, what are we up to? 6 or 7. We have these ludicrous forecasts that if the British people were stupid enough to vote to leave the European Union, we'd have this catastrophic fall in economic activity, a huge rise in unemployment, collapse in foreign direct investment. What happened? They were wrong by over 100 billion sterling. The economy grew. Unemployment is absolutely record lows.
yet.
No, that's what they said would happen if we were stupid enough to vote.
But we haven't left.
No,
and the point is
they said it would happen after the vote. And we had all the George Osborne nonsense, the £9 million leaflet going to every house, and they were completely wrong. So we have these ludicrous forecasts this week.
I hardly think you're in a position to lecture about other people being wrong when your side of this argument from the very beginning said, A, that Brexit would be easy, B, that Britain held the cards in the negotiations with the EU, C, that there would be a massive Brexit dividend of some £350 million a week that could then be ploughed into the NHS. These things were all falsehoods that your side peddled. So to criticise others for getting some economic forecast wrong seems to me absurd.
No, not some economic forecast. There was a very clear prediction by the Treasury at the time of the referendum that should people vote in the referendum, there would be an economic collapse. There had to be an emergency budget, we were told. Those were very, very clear forecasts, which have been proved totally wrong. And they've come up with more ludicrous forecasts this week. We found out today that, as an example, they said if we did free trade agreements around the world, you would see a 0.2% increase in GDP. I mean, it's just simply not credible that such a tiny increase in economic activity from free trade deals.
Hang on. I think we've aired the position that you still take on why, in your view, and I guess I'm not speaking for you, I'd like to hear it from your own lips, you think no deal is clearly better than Theresa May's deal, yes or no?
Well, there's no such thing as no deal. That would be World Trade Organization terms with obviously side deals on things like aviation, which have already been done.
All right.
So
let's call it the disorderly Brexit.
No, it's not disorderly. The World Trade Organization has imposed order on world trade.
With respect, you know the way the World Trade Organization works.
Countries.
The EU, if it doesn't do what you're convinced it's going to do, which is apparently just bow down to Britain's interest, if it doesn't do that, it'll go into dispute. Disputes at the WTO take years and years to resolve, so it will be a disorderly Brexit.
Why?
I just want to know whether that, in your view, with all the potential disorder, is better than Theresa May's deal.
Now, there's an establishment narrative peddling, exactly like Project Fear, Mark about 7 or 8, that WTO is a disaster, it's leaping off a cliff. It is not. It is working within the framework of world trade, which covers 98% of world trade. The EU is building up to 100 billion surplus with us. Why on earth are they going to jeopardise that? Why would they put that wrong?
Yeah, I understand your point.
Very important this. All our standards are the same. So one of the real blocks in the WTO is you cannot hide behind standards, phytosanitary, whatever they are, as an excuse for stopping trade. The World Customs Organization has made exactly the same point. They will have no grounds for stopping trade.
I think it's fair to say that I've got your message, unyielding when it comes to the arguments around the economics of Brexit, the implications of Brexit.
But emphatically better than this deal. If you want to answer that,
thank you. Now I've got that answer.
No,
so let's talk.
Absolutely no question. We are far better rejecting this deal, which I intend to do next week when I vote.
Clearly you do.
Speak against it tomorrow.
Clearly you do.
Get rid of that, then move straight back to a proper discussion to what President Tusk offered back in 7th of March, which is a comprehensive free trade deal. That's the way to go.
Let's talk raw politics. You believe you are going to win, your side is going to win, that Theresa May's deal is toast when it comes to this big parliamentary vote on December 11, yes?
I very much hope so.
So what happens then? What are you going to do next in political terms? Are you going to call for her to quit? Others have put their letters demanding a vote for a new Conservative Party leader already in. Are you going to put one in? And do you think the Conservative Party will see a challenge to Theresa May's leadership if she loses that vote?
No, what we want the leadership to do is to go back to the manifesto which they wrote on which we fought the election, and to go back to the Lancaster House speech and deliver which is leaving the single market, leave the customs union, and leave the remit the European Court of Justice. And that means going back to Tusk straight away and saying, right, we'll take up your offer of March, because we now have a solution to the Irish border.
But I want to discuss realpolitik with you.
And I want personalities.
We don't have much time. So will you or will you not put in a letter, as others already have done, and force a leadership challenge in the Conservative Party if she loses that vote?
Everyone wants to come back to personalities. I want to get back to the policy.
No, this is about practical politics. What's going to happen next? The Labour Party, for example, has made it clear that if she loses that vote, they are going to force a vote of confidence in the government. What would you do?
Well, obviously, I'm going to vote for a vote of confidence. The idea of having a crazy Marxist regime run by Corbyn would be absolutely catastrophic. So there's no
So
problem
Theresa
at all.
May remains in power. Here's what Jacob Rees-Mogg, a very close ally of yours, he says, we now have a government led by Remainers who want to keep us tied into the EU as tightly as possible. If he believes that, and I imagine you believe something similar, how can you possibly think that Theresa May is going to deliver you the Brexit you want?
Well, she said the right things in the election, and she said the right things at Lancaster House. So why do we go back to that? That is what we want to have delivered.
So you're not actually prepared to engage with the real world today. You're just going to hark back to something she said many, many months ago, rather than where she is today with her deal, totally committed to it, with a cabinet that supports it. If it goes down, I'm struggling to see how you, with any credibility, can still regard her as the leader of your party.
Well, I'm sorry about that, but I see myself just as a mainstream Conservative who wants to see the manifesto delivered. You go around Conservative associations, you get people in the street coming up to me saying, you're going to do this, aren't you? You're not going to let us down. It happens the whole time. People, the 17.4 million, expect this to be delivered. She promised it in the election. It wasn't some words some time ago. There's an election manifesto. She got the second largest number of votes since John Major. She was endorsed by the Labour Party. If we don't deliver this, there will be the most catastrophic damage to the integrity of our whole political system.
Let's talk about how it might pan out.
Really bad.
Well, really bad, you say. A party colleague of yours, Joe Johnson, who quit the government as a result of his deep dislike of this Theresa May Brexit deal from a very different perspective from yours. He actually was a Remainer and would like Britain to have a referendum. He says that there must now be, because there's no parliamentary majority for anything else, there must be a parliamentary vote to order another referendum. And that does look increasingly likely, doesn't it?
No, because I don't think it'll get through the Commons. I think those MPs who say that should remember what happened. David Cameron said, give me a majority, I will promise you an in or referendum. It's absolutely decisive, it's not advisory, as some people have said. He won, we had a referendum, 17.4 million people voted to leave against huge wall of propaganda bombarded by the Treasury, the £9 million leaflet, all the rest of it. That was then interpreted to mean leave the single market, leave the customs union, leave the ECJ in our election manifesto. Largest number of votes since John Major and endorsed by the Labour Party. Those are three huge democratic statements by the British people, please leave the European Union.
So you're a Democrat who is trying to tell me that a referendum, now that we know what the real alternatives are when it comes to Brexit and what Brexit actually means, you're a Democrat who's claiming to me that putting it back to the British people with this new knowledge is anti-democratic.
Bizarrely it is, because it would throw in the teeth.
You're right, it is bizarre. What you've just said is very bizarre. Do you acknowledge that?
Okay, is it the women's final at Wimbledon? Is it the best of three, or the men's final the best of five?
Come on, the argument has substantively changed.
No,
You've just acknowledged it. The British people now, as they did not know in 2016, they now know what Brexit will mean. And surely any Democrat would then say the British people have a right to decide, now that it's clear what it means, whether they want it.
No, sadly, because the government, having been elected on a manifesto, which was very clear, having had the Prime Minister make statement at Lancaster House, has made a complete botch. And what is being offered is a mile from Brexit. People want to leave. They voted to leave. That is not being offered at the moment. So
a final thought, if I may, because we're out of time. I've heard several MPs in recent days talking very openly and honestly about how difficult they find the current decision that faces them. They are losing sleep. They feel an enormous burden of responsibility, and they, frankly, are not entirely sure what the right thing to do is. I don't get any sense that you are weighing this decision with that sort of sense of a burden upon you in any way at all.
I've been working on this stuff probably since I first became an MP. And I was actually president of a European Trade Association and saw which way the European community at that time was going. What we're looking at is a continent which only has one other with a slower rate of growth, and that's Antarctica. The rest of the world is really growing. The rest of the world is mad keen to trade with us. And there's a most wonderful opportunity.
Right. We have to end there. But Owen Paterson, thank you very much indeed for being on Hard Talk.
Okay.
Thank you.